Carly Harris.
Greetings, one and all. How are y'all doing? You good? Okay. Well, first, I want to open the proceedings. I want to ask for permission from my esteemed elder. May I speak? And for permission from the ancestors as well. That is our African tradition. When we see an esteemed elder in our presence, an esteemed African elder, we always ask for permission to speak. So may I have permission to speak, Mama? Yes, I give thanks and praise. We give thanks. So I want to start out with a little reverence. You know, it's only fitting if we're talking about Honorable Marcus that we reverence the man's name, because those of us who are in the Congress and the Bobo Shanti order, we reverence the man as a God in flesh. So we'll start out with a little reverence in the courts of the mighty King David. Holy Emmanuel, I King Selassie, I Jah Rastafari. Give thanks and praise for life and the life giver, the three in one, the one in three, the earth, sky, and sea, the prophet, priest, and king. We give thanks and praise for the royal ensample of Honorable Marcus, I King Selassie, I Jah Rastafari, my Lord and Empress. So that's how we do it. So we start off with a nice vibration. So today we want to talk about liberation through culture. And of course, when we're talking about black liberation, one of the main, well, the main figure in the 20th century speaking about black liberation is Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey. So that is going to be the centerpiece of what I'll be talking about today, is about his influence on the black liberation struggle, the people he influenced, and also the repercussions that we can even feel today, not only in the realms of politics, but also in culture and music and so on and so forth. So for those of you who don't know about the life of Marcus Garvey, he was a Jamaican born in 1887, coming out of the parish of St. Anne in Jamaica. And his father was a Mason, and his father was someone who was described as someone who was frustrated. If you look into the colonial history, any colonial society, you'll see that a lot of black people were frustrated. People who had ambitions for their life many times were frustrated. So the elder Garvey was such a man. He was a Mason, as I said, but he had a very extensive library. He was someone who read a lot. And this, of course, had a great influence on the young Marcus coming up, because he was always surrounded by learning, by knowledge, by books. One thing I remember reading about his life that was a very formative experience for him was, since his father was a Mason, he was charged with the construction of tombs for the parish, St. Anne's Parish. And so often young Marcus would be going out into the graveyard with his father to construct the tombs. And one time, they dug the grave, and his father came out of the hole, but he left Marcus in there for a little while. And Marcus began to despair. He began to wonder, what's going to happen to me? What am I going to do? And within short order, maybe, I don't know, an hour or so later, his father came and told him, this is why I gave you this experience, so you will know that you will have trials and tribulations in life, and that you will have to depend on yourself in life. And so we know that he was a very confident person, and we can see where it come from, was from his father. So at a young age, he talks about he had a lot of different friends of different races. There was one particular young English girl that he was friends with when he was very young. And they played together, as often was the case with children. They don't know. And at some point, this young friend of his, the girl, was sent away to England by her father. And she was told, you're not to speak with Marcus ever again because he's a nigger. And he had never heard of this word before. This was news to young Marcus, and actually it was a great shock to him, because this was a young boy who was raised around books and learning, you know, around a self-reliant, strong black man as a father, you know, someone who was confident, you know, and so this was a great shock to his world. So he talks about that as being a formative episode in his life, a realization about, wow, there is a great schism in humanity. There is a history of slavery, a history of oppression that is borne by black people. So after a few years, when he was in his adolescent years, I think around age of 14, 15, he journeyed into Kingston, because St. Anne was a country. He journeyed into Kingston, and he began to be a printer's apprentice. He learned the printer's trade. And this also got him into politics, because there was a printer strike, I think around like 1907, 1908, somewhere around there. So he began to get his first taste of political activism. So we see Marcus starting to build. He's already starting to print. We know the word, the spoken word, the written word was something that was very central to his work later on. And now we see he's beginning to get political activism. And so he has a maternal uncle who lives in Central America, in Panama, the Panama Canal region. And at the time, the United Fruit Company, which I believe now is called Dole, United Fruit Company had a lot of plantations. And there were a lot of people from the different societies of the West Indies, a lot of Jamaicans, a lot of Bajans, people from all over, who were working in these plantations in pretty much slave labor conditions. And so Marcus Garvey now, being someone who was known for having a big mouth, known for being assertive, known for being a newspaperman, a journalist, he set about to organize these workers now. And so again, he began to even build his reputation even more while he was in Central America. But of course, a lot of this, we didn't really think about this when we think about Marcus Garvey, but I just want to share this with you, that the man had to go through a process of building himself before he began to be this great orator, this great black leader that we know of today. I think probably one of the most profound influences, I would say, on the life and the works of Marcus Garvey would be the life and the works and the legacy of the Honorable Booker T. Washington. If any of you have read about Booker T. Washington, he had a very important book called Up from Slavery. And if you haven't read this book, I really suggest you read this book, because it gives you a very good idea of black history and black reality in 19th century and very early 20th century America, especially dealing with the period of slavery, because he himself was a slave, and the period of Reconstruction. So now Marcus Garvey now, since Booker T. Washington was so well known at the end of his life, he was someone who was on a first name basis with ruling classes, with people in government, men of high affairs, business people, you know. So his book was read widely. Up from Slavery was read by Marcus Garvey. He was inspired enough that he started writing to Booker T, and they established a correspondence. Booker T. Washington, in fact, paid for Marcus Garvey's passage to come to America to meet him, because Booker T. Washington now was someone who had an economic plan. Because if we look back at history and the black leaders they had at the time, say, for example, someone like W.E.B. Du Bois was someone who was advocating not only for economic power, but for him it was more important to have, should I say, integration, and to be able to mingle with white society, because society was very segregated at that time. But Booker T. Washington was saying, no, what we need an economic plan. We need to have money. If a nation doesn't have any economic riches, they're not respected. There's no power in that. You know, we're not going with our hat in our hand begging, please, can you let me come and sit with you? No. We're going to build our own. That was Booker T. Washington's program, and that's what Marcus Garvey got from him. That's what inspired him so much. And so, unfortunately, even though Booker T. paid for his passage, of course, back in those days, it was letters, and you had to pay for the ticket and everything. It took some time. He passed away by the time Marcus Garvey got to America. Booker T. Washington had died. So he was despaired, but he set about creating what we now know as the UNIA, ACL, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, and the African Communities League. And what this did was made the first and the largest black movement in the African diaspora that the world has ever seen. And if we look at the legacy of the UNIA, we can see the footprint of Marcus Garvey in the life of Malcolm X, in the life of Martin Luther King, Noble Jew Ali. The Rastafari movement gets its inspiration and its founding prophet from Marcus Garvey. So many black leaders. In fact, you would say that every black leader of the 20th century drew something from Marcus Garvey, were it not the cultural pride, were it not the economic program, were it not the awareness of the news of the day, knowing who you are, knowledge of self. You know, that all was something that you could see in the program of all subsequent black leaders. But getting back to the UNIA now, what was very, to me, very inspiring was, again, the economic program, and the UNIA comprised the Black Star Line Company, which was a company of black steamships where they were actually engaged in doing trade in the Caribbean and also in Africa as well. You had the Black Cross nurses. You had a military organization as well with the UNIA. So it was something that was important in that it gave black people something to belong to, because we have to think about, we're talking about a period right after Reconstruction. If you look at the Civil War in the United States, after Reconstruction, that's when the northern states imposed their will upon the southern states and reorganized them according to how they wanted them to be as a defeated area of the country. But that only lasted about 20 years. And in the North, they all went home. And that's when you saw the reintroduction of white supremacy, the reintroduction of, well, not the reintroduction, I should say, the continuation of slavery in the form of mass incarceration, in the form of all sorts of loitering laws, which basically criminalized black people and locked them up for anything. Jim Crow and lynching. I'm sure you've all heard of Jim Crow and lynching. All that started as a backlash from the Reconstruction, just as now, if we can talk about right now in history, we're seeing a backlash in the United States from the reign of Barack Obama in the form of Donald Trump. So in the same backlash that we're having now is kind of like the same backlash they had then. The northern states felt imposed upon because, the southern states felt imposed upon by the northern states because you had black people who 20 years prior were their slaves were now the lieutenant governor. They were now the senator. They were now in the state house. They were now making laws. So people were losing their minds, people who had owned slaves and were invested in white supremacy, you know. So this is just to paint the picture of the environment that Marcus Garvey was coming up in. Also, in the time that he was coming up, this is the height of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s was the only time it's probably about as big as it is now as it was then. But back in the 20s, the Ku Klux Klan marched openly in Washington, D.C. In states, certain states like Indiana, it was something like you had to be in the Klan to be in politics. Other states like Colorado as well, Oregon, you know. And so this was the environment that Marcus Garvey was coming up in. So at the height of the UNIA, ACL, they had 700 branches, both nationally and internationally, 1 million dues-paying members at their height. So this was somebody who began to attract the attention not only of black people, but also governments around the world. He had ambitions through Liberia. He had a Liberia company where they were planning on developing Liberia as a foothold in Africa, because Marcus Garvey, his cultural program was full of slogans that were designed to give black people confidence and give them pride. So one of them was Africa for the Africans, those at home and those abroad. You know, and so this was something that he showed in his establishment of the UNIA-ACL in all these different countries. But right around, I guess it was right around 1922, as I said, he began to get a lot of attention from the United States government, notably the FBI, because then as now, the FBI and the United States government are very afraid of any sort of black unity in the United States. And so Marcus Garvey was viewed as someone who could be a black messiah, who had shown already through his example the ability to unite black people of different faiths, Jewish black people, Christian black people, Muslim black people who just didn't have a religion, but they just wanted to just be free, you know, all over the West, in Africa, you know. So he was somebody who was really, should I say, feared, even to the point that Ho Chi Minh, when he was in New York, he went to see Marcus Garvey speak. So even now in Vietnam, even though Ho Chi Minh had his own program, he took something from Marcus Garvey too, you know? So that's something important to remember as well. But I think we look at the era of the 1920s, we can begin to see the demise, unfortunately, of the UNIA as it was known at that time, because Marcus Garvey attracted the attention of a man named J. Edgar Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover was the head of the FBI from the 1920s all up until, I think J. Edgar Hoover died around 1973, 74. So he was in the spot for a good 50 years, J. Edgar Hoover. And this was somebody who detested black people, but oddly enough, J. Edgar Hoover was black. J. Edgar Hoover passed for black. J. Edgar Hoover had, if you look at his family photographs, you can tell there's black people in there. He has cousins that have written books that said, my cousin J. Edgar Hoover was a black man who hated black people. Because at that time, you know, in America, it was such a heavily racist and racialized society, and privilege was accorded based on your heritage and your racial makeup, that a lot of people, if they could, they would pass for white. So even now you have a lot of Americans who are not really white Americans, and they may have a black grandma somewhere in the kitchen, or, you know what I'm saying? So that was the same thing with J. Edgar Hoover. And funny enough, I just did a little reading about him. You know, if you had to sign up for the FBI, they would go all through your past and go all into your background. They interview your elementary school teacher. They interview your Sunday school teacher at church. They ask everybody everything about you. But they said, funny enough, there was no information on J. Edgar Hoover. He just scrubbed all his record clean, so it's very hard during his lifetime to find any information about him. But again, J. Edgar Hoover, really, if you look at the 20th century, if you look at the main enemy of black people and black movements, it would be J. Edgar Hoover, because he was somebody who was implicated in the murder of Martin Luther King, the murder of Malcolm X, the demise of Marcus Garvey, so many other people. They had a program called the COINTELPRO program, which basically was programmed by the FBI to snoop on leftists, be they Native American, be they Chicano, be they black, be they white leftists, whatever, to snoop on you, to gather information from you, to write letters to your friends as if saying that they saw you speaking to your enemy, or that you were somehow collaborating with the police or something like that, trying to always cause problems within groups. That's what the FBI was doing at the time. And so this is what J. Edgar Hoover did with Marcus Garvey in the 1920s. And what happened was they realized they couldn't really get Honorable Marcus on any crime because he hadn't really done anything wrong. So what they did, they got him on what they called mail fraud. Basically, he was selling, the Black Star Line company was selling stocks in ships, and they were in the process of buying a ship called the Phyllis Wheatley. But actually, they hadn't finished or closed the sale yet of the Phyllis Wheatley. And they had printed up brochures advertising, this is the ship that we will be getting. We have not got it yet, but this is the ship we will be getting, and they were selling shares for the ship to raise money to buy it. Well, the government said, that's mail fraud, and you can't do that. And so they imprisoned Marcus Garvey. Of course, they had a big trial. You can read about this trial if you want to look at the book, The Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey. It has basically its whole program, and in the end, it has all the transcripts from the trial, which is very interesting because you can see really how the government went about constructing their case and everything. But he served time in the penitentiary in Atlanta, and then he was deported from New Orleans. And after the trial and everything, the UNIA really lost a lot of membership, not only because of that, because of the constant attacks from W.E.B. Du Bois and also A. Philip Randolph, two very staunch integrationists who were very much against the idea of black self-reliance or black power. They felt like, well, we should just get along and just go along to get along, and we shouldn't make anyone mad or be too black because that would be bad for us. You know, they were not at the level where they were actually assuming their pride in themselves. And that's why they didn't like Marcus Garvey, because Marcus Garvey was someone who was very black. He was very short. He was very kind of stout. He wasn't like a pretty dude, you know what I mean? And so he wasn't anyone who could pass into polite society, because at that time in the United States, even among black folk, there was a lot of division in terms of what color your skin is, what your hair looks like. You know, I used to live in New Orleans, and even now in New Orleans, they have clubs where if you want to join, they call the pencil test. And if they put a pencil in your hair and it falls through, then you can join the club. But if that pencil stick in your hair, you can't go into the club. You can't go in. Yes. They also have a paper bag test. Now these are all private clubs that are run in New Orleans, but it's happening today, where if you are darker than the paper bag, you can't go in. You know? And so even then, back in the 1920s, that's how things were running. So if you saw black people of means, they were very rarely very black people. They were people who were of mixed race heritage or who didn't look too black. And such was the case. But one of the strengths about Marcus Garvey is that even though he was derided for being so black and so African and so rough and so raw and everything, he was someone who welcomed all types of black people. He was like, I don't care what you look like. If we are black people and we love Africa, we can have a basis for a greater unity. Why do we need a greater unity? Because if you look around the world, every nation is organized, and they're organized based on principles of self-love, self-reliance, self-respect, knowing who you are, you know. And so that was the same thing. Marcus Garvey realized, you know, that coming out of this 400, 500 years of slavery, the horrors of Reconstruction, Jim Crow lynching, black people needed to have some self-confidence, some knowledge of self, because he realized that, well, we call him a prophet. He would even prophesy and say that in 100 years hence, black people will get sick from drinking all the poison of European civilization. So he already was seeing forward into the perils of globalism, the perils of industrialization, and how we're being left behind. And those of us who have trusted so much in this system, what if we have to show for it but a bunch of polluted oceans, a bunch of polluted air, economic systems that don't work, you know? So just to sum it up, if we want to look at black liberation, I really feel like Marcus Garvey, for the 20th century, is someone who deserves all of our attention, because you can't really look at black freedom, black liberation without passing through Marcus Mosiah Garvey. So, anyone have any questions? Yes, Ross.
I have a question. If Marcus Garvey, he was not the only one. Before him, there was Edward Wilmot Blyden. Okay. Well, Garvey, for me, as exactly what you said, is the person that made all of the black people in the world under the red, black, and green. Yeah, the RBG. But there's one question. If they took 385,000 slaves, 385,000 slaves arrived in the Americas, but the amount of slaves that were taken is estimated at 11 million. So where did the rest of the slaves go? And also, when those slaves arrived in Americas, there was already 10 million black people already in the Americas, because even in Valencia, in 15th century, they brought some of them here. And they had to prove that they were not African. Yeah, they had to have the documentation of the Americas, which the slave owners here destroyed. Here in Valencia, Sevilla, and many places in Spain. So there's a mixture. I know not all of us came from Africa, okay? But in 1983, Jesse Jackson went to Congress and put this title of Afro-Americans, because before that, from all the classifications from Native American to Negro, then from there to Black American, colored, and then to, in the end, to Afro-American. So the people there, we're a mix. Garvey was right. His philosophy is right. This is our color for all of us. But not all of us were from Africa. This is my point. What do you think of this?
Well, I think that's a true statement. There's a brother, you may have heard of him. His name is David Imhotep, and he wrote a book called Africans Were the First Americans. And it's full of there's a lot of people who find fault with him, but I feel like his scholarship is sound from what I've looked at. His DNA analyses look very strong, but basically he's saying what you're saying. And I think it's true, because if you look at European society, the concept of race does come from Europe. And so the concept of looking at people and classifying them and putting it into a system whereby that you can economically enact certain things against people and do things that take, that comes from here, And so naturally, if they're going to a new world and they're seeing a conglomeration of different people, they will look at the darker ones and of course want to say that they're black and they're African. And how it happened in America is that when they would do that, they would go to the Native American community, and all the real dark natives, they say, well, you Africans, you go live with the black people, we taking your land. So, yeah. Yes, I. My Lord bless it. Yes, I. Okay, any other comments or questions?
Where do you think we are at the moment? From the time of Marcus Garvey, Edward Blyden, where do you think we are at the moment? Do you think that we are awake as a nation on this earth, or do you think that there's a lot of work to be done?
There's a lot of work to be done. Yeah, I feel like we're in a stage of cosmetics, meaning that, say, where I spent most of my life in the United States, a lot of us, we like to grow our dreads, and Kwanzaa come, we gonna put on our little kente, and we got a kinara, and we say blessed love, and we don't eat meat, and but it's like, no, we gotta go way deeper than that, my Lord. It's like, that's all the cosmetic thing, and that's good, but we have become content with doing things for show in America. And there's a lot of, celebrations. Even in Rasta and the Congress, you see people, they just, going through the motions, and a lot of us, we have a lot to work. Like, for example, I'm thinking, when the Black Panther movie came out, right? I mean, it's a movie. I like the movie. But having lived in Africa and been to Africa, I felt like, okay, this is not really representing Africa to me. Like, it's a Hollywood idea of what it is. And in that sense, it's cool that the children can look at it because it's like a comic book. But the problem is that people don't do the work nowadays, and they think what they see on the screen represents the reality. You know what I mean? And so that was a problem, and I realized that a lot of us in the United States, and also in Europe as well, in France and England, I noticed that, we're content to like dress up in our African clothing to go see Black Panther, and then we're gonna go back to our job and go back to our life. So what is that? You know, that's not liberation. I don't know, it's like not even a Band-Aid on your wound, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, we need a lot more, you know, and I think it's really a shame when we look at what Marcus Garvey achieved with no internet, no radio, with writing letters and telegrams and newspapers, you know what I mean? That's what he did, and we're not doing that. We're online talking shit. Sorry, but that's what we're doing. We're not like, you know, doing it, you know, and so I really feel like now is the time for people, especially now, and not just Black people, but all people, to know who they are, to come to a fullness of yourself, of your traditions, because this modern stuff we got is not working. We need to realize that we have traditions that were sustainable, that we left behind, and it wasn't that long ago that we left them. And I'm just talking about like putting a seed in the ground and growing something, you know, sewing your own clothes, you know, making your own almond milk, whatever. You know, we have to do more of those things because that's what's going to save us, you know, and specifically as Black people, but specifically as humans in general, you know, that's what we need, you know. So yeah, just to answer your question, we have a lot of work to do, and it's basic, you know, like we got to get in our families, get around people that are like-minded, and build and do things that are sustainable, that will free us from whatever systems that are holding us, because we can't just like be in the system and then fight the system and think that that's going to do it. We have to actually create a separate system outside of the system that we in, that we hate so much. And even if we start small, we got to do something, you know. So that's where we at right now.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Actually, it might be tagging on to what you were just talking about. I'll also say thank you for being here.
No, thank you.
Work is such a general concept, and it means so many things. When you tell someone to do their work, it can mean, there's so many variations of what that means. Yes. And do you have any, in your opinion, a type of work we should prioritize? Mm-hmm. Or a direction that you, in your opinion, would be a direction to go?
Ooh.
So it might be expanding on what you were just saying,
right.
Or this might be new.
Right. Wow. Yeah. I mean, we all got our talents. You know, we all got stuff we're good at. You know, we all got to think like, what am I good at? What does the world need? And what do I like to do? You know, and then we'll have the answer. You know, and it could be really simple. You know, there's so much work to be done, and it's like it's all important. You know, you could just pick up trash your whole life, and that would be great. You know, if you just like beautify your neighborhood. You know, but I mean, it's so much work. You know, I would say in general, what inspires me the most and what I think is the most lasting is land and wealth redistribution. That is really something that needs to happen right now. Because, you know, we're talking about, you know, being admitted into certain spheres of influence or rubbing shoulders with the elite, putting our children even in great schools. That's great. But you don't get rich or you don't get powerful by proximity. You have to actually own something. I don't like rub up against someone and just like get their power. No, I gotta have my own land. I gotta have my own stuff, my own everything, you know what I mean? So that's what we need, you know, we have to have our own. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for being here today.
Yes.
I wanted to ask what you could say to the organizers in the room, to the dancers in the room who are in this specific community of blues dancers or swing dancers, and what you think will be the key to better events or to more supportive events? Like, how can we, as people who are dancing, are organizing events surrounding this dance rooted in African culture, you know?
Yes. Well, I would say that culture cannot be isolated, and we have to look at it from all sides. So I feel like if you like African dance, you like blues dance, then learn about the culture in its entirety. Not only the dance, not only the music, but the food, the way people talk to each other, the history, you know, all those things is very important. Like, for example, I play the blues because that's what I came up around. That's what the old people played, you know. And there's certain experiences that I had that I just think about when I play the blues, like being in church, you know, with old people, you know, being down south with old people, eating with old people, you know what I mean? Those experiences. So I would say that think about all the stuff that you can do to inform your dancing, you know, and don't just be like, oh, I'm dancing, you know what I mean? Because it's really, dancing is the expression of your life. Just like when I'm playing music, it's the expression of the reality of your life, you know? Like, you could have been a writer, you could have been anything, but you still got a life to express, you know? So that's what I would say. Yeah.
I like that a lot.
Yeah. Give thanks. Anybody else? Yeah.
Thank you for talking to us today, Mr. Howe.
Thanks for coming.
Could you speak to a little bit more to help us understand the link between cultural oppression and economic oppression, and also economic liberation and cultural liberation?
Right. Okay, well, if we look at colonialism, I'm just thinking of the link between cultural oppression and economic oppression. If we look at the stages of colonialism, in the first stages of contact, it's usually the missionaries who come, and they're smiling, and they're like, yes, we have this new religion for you, and if you accept this, we're going to give you a nice new pair of shoes. We're going to give you 20 euros. Oh, you get a better cut of meat because you like Jesus, but you're a pagan. No, you can't. So that's where a lot of that starts, right there, in that contact situation, playing favorites, you know. And then you have the anthropologists who come through. Anthropology, even though it's great to study culture, anthropology has been used as a weapon of imperialism and colonialism to explain and break down what the native people, what the people are thinking about, what's important to them, where their power comes from. And then the military comes in, you know, and then they make economic zones so they can have trade. So there's a connection in that you have to make a people submit culturally before they're willing to give up their land, or even before they can be tricked out of their land. They're not really give it up, you know what I'm saying? But they have to go through that stage of being what they call deracinated, deculturalized, you know, and that is when they can be exploited, when their land can be taken. Because if you have a people who know who they are, you can't take nothing from them people. You can't do nothing with that. And they could be poor as dirt, but they're not, if they know who they are and they're proud of it. Like, look at the people, say, for example, in Standing Rock, Pine Ridge, you know, the Lakota Sioux. They have nothing, but they know who they are, and they ain't going nowhere, you know, and they're going to stand out there in the ice and the snow against the United States military just to protect their land and their water. So that says something, you know what I mean? So yeah, I think that's a very good question, and there's a clear link. And if we look at how racism, colonialism has operated, the end result is to take people's land. It's enrichment, you know, just like George Bush and them went over to Iraq. They wouldn't be messing over there if they didn't have oil. They're not over there just because they like sand. They're over there to take. It's pillage, you know what I mean? And this is how nations build themselves up, by taking from other nations, you know? And that's what Marcus Garvey talked about as well. He talked about, he talked about the importance of nationhood, knowing who you are, you know? Nations operate in their best interests, you know? They don't give up power because of moral persuasion. They have to be forced to. And that's what history shows us, you know? And it's nothing different from today. Today we're forced with a system, like I said before, we don't like. It's not working for us, but we still get up and we go to work. And we still get up and we pay that bill. I mean, I do it too, you know? But I'm just saying that's what we have to do, is really construct a new system. And even if it's just like, okay, I'm gonna make my own clothes, you know? I'm gonna grow my own food. I won't eat out anymore. I'm gonna sell my car, you know? Simple things. I'm not gonna, you know, buy all this plastic crap. I'm not gonna eat junk food no more, you know what I mean? So, yeah, I think that's our choice, you know? And we don't really have much time. You know, if you look at, I know y'all watch the news, we have maybe 15, 20 years, you know, of this present situation going on, and it's going to really start going south quick, you know, so it's time. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your speech. Has been great, very inspiring. Thank you, Robert and Encarny, for bringing you here to Valencia. It's a pleasure. My question is, what do you think about the blues world of the musicians? Because like Blues Foundation, the Grammys, it's like blues music is always the starring people are white people. Yeah. Great musicians, of course, but what happens with people like Marcos Knox? Maybe you know it from St. Louis. Yeah. I saw last summer in St. Louis. And what happens with black blues musicians? Mm-hmm. Do you think they are in some way really apart from the great praises?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Yeah, and that's, you know, we could have a 2-3 day conference just on that question, for real. Yeah. Well, I would say the question is, what about the black blues musician? And, you know, basically, are we kind of on the side, or we are not? And we are. We are marginalized in a large degree, and certain things have happened in the recent past to make me know that that's a true statement. For example, there's a brother named Chris Thomas King. Yeah. Chris Thomas King comes from Louisiana. His father was Tabby Thomas, legendary black blues musician from the Deep South, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He's put out blues records, but he doesn't do like, I'm gonna play Pseudo Chicago all night. He actually does blues that is up to date, but you know, it's also grounded in tradition. Anyway, he put out a record recently, and the Grammy organization, the committee, said that it wasn't blues. Said that it's not going to be blues, it's not going to, now mind you, this is all people who are not blues people. They don't play blues music, none of them are black. But here they are passing judgment saying, no, Mr. Black Man, sorry, that's not blues. This over here is blues, you know? And I think it would be maybe a little less absurd if there was not such a double standard. For example, can you imagine, say, a black awards show, say, going to, say, Argentina, and having a committee of non-Argentinians and saying, no, that's not tango. This is tango. It would never happen. You know, it would never happen. And why can we only envision it in one way? Because of what? The legacy of colonialism and racism, whereby certain people can say, this is this, and this is not that. And even though you come from that culture, you cannot define what it is. I do, because it's my award show. You know, and so really, in a way, you can't get mad. As I said before, we need our own. We can't like get mad at the Grammys for doing what the Grammys done, because think about it, like all these great musicians, a lot of them have never won Grammys. You know what I mean? Like a whole lot of them. I don't think Bob Marley ever won a Grammy when he was alive. I don't think John Coltrane, Louis Armstrong, Charlie Parker, you know, all them guys, they didn't earn Grammys. So obviously, you know, the Grammy is not the measure of greatness. But just to say that those institutions are not looking at the black blues musician, they're looking really at what is commercially viable and what is palatable for the cultural climate of the day. And if in blues, if you're too black, it's seen as being a problem. Because in blues music, in the past, say, well, since about the 1960s, it's not only black people playing blues. Now, prior to that, it was almost totally black people playing blues. You might have had a couple white people, but it was very, extremely rare. It was a black music, you know, just like there's all different types of music. Blues is one of those musics, you know. But since the entrance of white people, young white people, and people with money into the blues, that has changed the dynamic, because you have to remember that blues for black people was not a profession. It wasn't something people did for money. There was no circuit, there was no like tours, there was no, you know what I mean? Like you just played in your little neighborhood for your people, and they had a little rent party, and you went over here and played that, and you might have called it a tour. You get in your car and you drive somewhere, you get in the Greyhound bus and you play somewhere. But it's not like it is now, where you got like a venue and you go and they have, you know, publicity and you're on the radio. No, because it was very segregated, and we didn't have access to those venues, those avenues to promote our music as black people. And so at that time, you know, that's what it was like. But the thing is with the blues now is, since the market has come in, the money has come into the blues, we have now different definitions of what the blues is that are competing. Just like other terms, like the term race, for example. No one is really ever united as to what racism is or what race is. Everyone, oh, that's racist. Oh, that's racist. You know, like, same with the blues. People don't really know. They use the word a lot, but it's like, if you really look at the history, it's much deeper than a guitar and a man playing. That's the stereotype. Blues, if you look at it, that is the black traditional culture of people in the Americas, specifically southeastern United States, people who were descended from slavery, and the slavery area was the southeastern United States. That's what the blues is. That's the story of those people in their music. And it's not sad music. It's not good time getting drunk. No, it's their music. Just like you have Morna in Portugal, you got Tango. That's music. You know what I mean? It's talking about the reality of the people. And so now with the blues, if you look at it, it's not only that, it's also lyricism. Like there was a poet, Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes wrote in blues verse, showing us that it doesn't even have to be about the music, you know? And if you were to sit with somebody like, I had a friend, he passed away, named R.L. Burnside. Anyone heard R.L. Burnside before? R.L. was somebody who, even though he played, he was blues, because he could say a poem to you that rhymed, and it would literally last like 4 hours. He had verse in his head. He would just go. Like, I took a flight with RL. We traveled from Amsterdam to Memphis, Tennessee. And he was sitting in front of me. He turned around and he talked to me for 8 hours. And it was all rhymed. It's like one long poem. You know what I mean? So that's the blues. You know, so it's deeper than that. It's that black creativity, that black tradition. That's what informs the music, you know, but it's a lot deeper than that. And also we have to realize, as an aside, that even the word blues was not what black people came up with. Black people didn't say, hey, we're going to play some music and we're going to call it the blues, or hey, let's play some blues. No. Europeans called it that because they heard black people playing their music and they said, that music makes me feel strange, it makes me feel melancholy, it gives me the blues. That's where that comes from, you know, and so we have to realize that this music, blues, reggae, ska, R&B, gospel, jazz, hip hop, all of that comes from the same tree, the same experience, and that comes through the blues. You know, you can't have any of that without having the blues. You know, the blues is where it all comes from, and that blues is that essential African American, that's that root culture, you know, that we have. And if you really look at it, before the blues, what do we have? We had work song. You know, and if you listen to work song, I don't know how y'all, many of y'all listen to like Dance Hall or Capleton or Sizzler, that's work song. You know, if you listen to anything like the blues, like Lead Belly or Sun House, that's work song, you know, because that was a uniting reality of black people in the diaspora. We were all working outside, hard work in the fields, digging levees, digging ditches, building roads, you know, all those things. So we had music to inform those activities, you know, and that's where it comes from. And that's what really was before the blues, you know, because before that, we had our African music, and that's what we arrived with, you know. So all that is to say, you know, we have to look at these genres and break it down, because these genres are used to encapsulate something and sell it to you in a little package, but we have to really break that apart and really look at the roots of it so we know where we're coming from with the music and with the history, too. But another thing with, you asked about the Blues Foundation, myself, that's okay. Yeah, it's time. Yes. But another thing with the Blues Foundation is they're self-appointed, meaning that, you know, in traditional culture, no one from the outside can come in your village and say, I'm the chief of your stuff. I'm running your stuff now. Don't you like me? I'm giving money to your people. And no, this is what you're supposed to be doing in your town, repping your stuff, you know, giving light to what you're doing, not letting someone else on the outside. And that's how I feel the Blues Foundation is. It's people who don't have that blues connection. They're people who like the blues, you know, but as far as the hereditary cultural, they're not there on them levels. They're not. You know, they're into it because it's a way that they can organize the scene, and also it comprises booking agents, it comprises festivals. It's a business thing. You know, it's not about the culture, you know, and even the concept of a competition. I'm sorry, I'm not feeling it. I'm not into no blues competition. That's not where it's coming from, you know? I don't see it like that. Now, I feel like if we really want to get back to the blues and what it's about, then it has to, number one, serve the people of the community and not be something that they feel alienated from. It has to include the people. And number two, it's got to include all aspects of the culture. Like I was talking before about dancing, you can't just look at the music and say, oh, I like this music, but I don't want to hear about all that other black stuff and black liberation and all that other stuff, police brutality. And no, that all comes with it. You got to take it all, you know what I mean? So if you're going to talk about the blues, you got to talk about all the dirt, all the bad stuff, all the good, because it's the truth is what we're working with. You know, if you're going to express yourself, you know, and as an artist, that's what we deal with. We got to deal with the truth. You know, people don't like it, but, you know, that's how it has to be. You know, you got to give the truth, because if not, it's just entertainment, you know what I mean? And myself, I like to be entertained, but we don't got time for that right now. You know what I mean? We really got to be pushing messages, you know? So, yeah.
Great, thank you.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Yes. Yeah, I can hear you.
What do you think about cultural appropriation? Why is a growing number of people like appropriating black culture so much?
Right. Well, yeah, because there's two answers to that. Number one, and I've thought about this, if anyone feels free to appropriate another culture, it's because they feel like they have the power to do so. And what gave people the power to appropriate black and indigenous culture but colonialism? You know, during colonialism, if you were the subject, not only your person was the property, the commerce, but everything you produced was the property of the oppressive class. And this same mindset is still with us today, such that when black people say or stand up and say, blues is black music, people are like, act like you're taking something from them. People seem threatened, and I've seen it myself in the blues. Why is that? Because for so long, we as black people were in a situation where we didn't own the product of our own inventions. So many things have been created, it's always something new coming up. The ironing board, the washing machine, the lawnmower, Jack Daniel's whiskey was created by a black man. The light, Elijah McCoy, the traffic light, all the different technologies for the railroads, the cell phone. We can go on and on and on. And so we are in a situation now where all this is coming to light, but it's always been the case. It's always been the case. If you were a slave, Africans were enslaved because they had technology and knowledge that was needed to build the Americas. They weren't just like brute labor. They were people who were skilled artisans who were coming from a civilization where they had already been nation builders. And so naturally, when they were enslaved, they were exploited for their knowledge. And now we're just getting to the point where we realize, oh, a black person did that. Oh, a black person did that. Oh, you know what I mean? So, yeah, I think that there's a lot to say for realizing the history and, giving credit where credit is due. But on cultural appropriation, I would say that, you have to respect other people's cultures, Like, there's a lot of cultures I love, but I'm not going to go and wear that stuff because I don't have that connection to it. And my ancestors didn't die for that. You know what I mean? My ancestors didn't live for that. It's like, I don't have that connection. For example, there's a brother I know, I won't name his name, but he's a guitar player for a reggae band, a very well-known reggae band. He's a black brother, he's a Rasta, but he likes to wear Chinese clothing, right? And he was in his clothing that's like traditional because he travels, he went there. And this couple was like, oh, wow. They were like trying to talk to him. They were honored that he was wearing their clothing. So they're like, oh, wow, brother, cool. You wearing our stuff, and that means this, and that means that, and how'd you get that? He didn't know anything about it. He was like, oh, I don't know, I just bought it off the rack. And they were like, what? Ugh! They were disgusted, and they should have been, because it's like, you're not showing that respect. Show the respect, you know what I mean? And so I feel like, and also, we all have something that we can claim. We all got a grandma. We all got a grandpa, and they all got culture, you know what I mean? And we should recognize that, because if we don't, we are at a loss. I find as I travel, the people that I have the worst problems with, people who don't know they self. Everyone I've met who knows who they are and is cool with who they are and loves themselves, I can get with you. But if you're not on that program, I cannot get with you. You got to know who you are and love yourself, And if you're culturally expropriating something, I'm not really convinced that you loving yourself, because you're definitely not showing love to anybody else, because you're not being conscious of the history that goes with it. You know what I mean? And we can't play dress up. It's those times are done, and we're in a situation now in history where we have to really take a reckoning of what has happened and make it better. And so, yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah. All right. Yes?
Hey, you were speaking about the commodification of the music and culture and the art forms. Do you have any kind of I guess, advice for individuals? How can we be more mindful when we are, I hesitate to say consuming culture, when we are seeking out the art that we wanna, imbibe? Like, how can we be more mindful of, these people who've come into scenes with lots of money and they can do what they want with, or think they can do what they want with the culture that they're just,
Right.
commodifying?
Well, I think we all have our influences, and we all live in a world that has a lot of great stuff in it that people have made. But we have to know who we are. We have to know who we are and experience the world from that place of standing in our square. I know who I am. And I can take in my influences, like I'm wearing a jean jacket. I like my jean jacket. I like my Converse. I didn't make these. They didn't come from Africa, but I like them. I can make that influence, and I can still be fully an African by wearing these things. I'm not appropriating anything. I'm just being myself, but I know who I am. You know what I mean? So I think that's what we need to do, is we need to come from a place of, I know who I am, and I am enjoying what is out there, but doing it respectfully and knowing who I am. And also, there's certain situations where you're going to be like a guest in someone's house. You can't go into someone's house and call the shots. You'd be like, okay, can I enter? You're going to be humble. And when you're going to be in there, you're going to do what is expected of you to do so that you can stay. And so we all have places where we're guests, and we all have places where we are at home. And we're not all at home all the time, everywhere. We don't got the right to put up our feet on everyone's stuff. We have the right to do that at our own house. So I think that's what we need to do more of, is just like I do it in my music. I know I'm blues, I play the blues, but, I've lived in Mali, I've lived in Cameroon, I've been to Guinea, and, I play with a bunch of different griots and jalis, and so that informs my music too, but I do it from a blues standpoint. I'm not going to be like, okay, I'm going to play this like Tumani Diabate. No. Okay. Yes. Thank you.
How do you show that holding on to the culture, respecting the cultures, the different cultures, that when you mix it in your music and you play it, how do you deliver that? How do you show that?
Ooh, wow. Well, I think it has to, for me, the lyrical aspect is where it manifests for me. What I'm talking about, the topics that I'm addressing, who I'm talking to, what standpoint. Musically, it's more mystical for me, really. I just kind of listen to stuff, and then stuff just kind of comes out, So, but how do I do that? For me, it's all about being true and talking about what I know about, and knowing what I don't know nothing about, and not talking about that. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
And that within dance, because here, the dancers here come for the love of blues, and how that they can emulate that within their dance, within holding on to the culture that you shared.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is with blues dance, it's a very, it's a deep tradition. And there's different sides to it. There's different regions to it, So I would say, that we got to go deeper, instead of just, because I've seen people say they're doing blues dance, but I wasn't convinced, I have to say. In America, I've seen that, because I find that a lot of people in America, a lot of times look at the blues tradition as something that's facile, like, oh, I can do that. Yeah, I can play the blues. I can blues dance, and I've seen people do that and say that, and it wasn't really the case, And really, the older generation of people who were doing that blues dancing, they're pretty much all gone now in the States. Like when I was younger and I would play with old people, they would dance, And now we don't, as black traditional musicians, we don't dance that much. And that's what's missing, you know, in our traditional culture. And that's what you see in everyone's traditional culture. They got, you know, their playing, they got their singing, they got their dance. It's got sides to it, you know. So that's what we're missing. That's what we need to get back to.
So we have to finish. Yes. So maybe if you want to tell us your last words, we'll be thankful.
Okay. Wow. Well, wow, I just want to thank you all so much for the opportunity, for lending me your ears, for sharing with me. And I've really enjoyed my time with you, and I hope we can do it again. I want to leave you with some words to inspire you. And I would say, in the words of Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, what man has done, man can do. So whatever that you want to do, you can do it, because it's already been done somewhere, somehow. So we have a lot of work to do, so let's go and do it.
Thank you so much.